Okay, so this is my first sketchbook. This is a Stillman and Birn Zeta series sketchbook um, that I got to use for urban sketching back in March of this year. And I've just completed it, so let's take a look through it. Okay, so I started out just with pen and ink, and this is a sketch of Beckett's Bank on Park Row in Leeds, as done from my bus stop in Leeds. A quick sketch of a vase of flowers in Outcast Yacht Club, which is a bar cafe in Leeds city centre. And then this is Bramley in West Leeds, so sitting in Costa Coffee, and this is the view out over the road of a historic archway. It's a really odd bit of architecture, some really strange shapes and angles there, but I really liked the tree. See. Moving on, I took this with me to a friend's house and drew my coffee cup at brunch. And then back to the bus stop drawings. This is again standing at the bus stop on Park Row looking up the road, and I really like the contrast of the crane and the more traditional architecture next to each other. Back to Mrs. Athers in Leeds, and this is just a quick sketch of the water bottle and the glasses on the table. The water bottle's got mint leaves in there. And in the same day, I just did a quick profile sketch of one of the other patrons there who didn't know I was sketching her, so that's why it's quite rough and quick and loose, because I had to do it before she moved or noticed. And another surreptitious profile, this time on a train, and I thought I made him look a bit like a werewolf by accident. This was a sketch I did sitting in a cafe on Hedgerow, and you can see I've made a note here about how I was frustrated with getting the proportions and relative positions right. It's difficult. This sketchbook is only 3 by 5 inches, so doing a full-size building is really difficult with this sketchbook, especially if you want to put in details. And I was just starting to learn and understand how that worked a bit more. I had a quick visit up to Durham in April, and this is a view of the cathedral from the riverbank, which is a lovely day out and nice to do. You can see as well I have a habit of closing the book before the ink is dry, and I get ink prints and muck everywhere, which is a bit frustrating, but it kind of adds character to the whole thing. So then on to Kapow Coffee in Leeds in the Thornton Arcade, and another little coffee cup sketch, just quick and simple, but I actually really like the character of that one. And again, sitting in Thornton Arcade using a different fountain pen filled with purple ink. I believe this is Pelikan Violet ink, and trying to get the perspective right. So the looking down this very narrow arcade in Thornton Arcade, getting all the details in. I didn't quite get the perspective right, but I think I did okay, sort of trying to get it across. You can sort of see how that's developing. And then this is the first time I took my sketchbook to Empire with me, Empire being a live action role play event that takes place in a field. And this is one of the characters, Anastasia. I was really pleased with how that turned out, and the player was actually quite happy with it as well. It's a nice little thing to have in the book. Still at Empire, this is a view of the field from the main gate. Took me a couple of attempts to get it done because it kept raining, that's why there's some splotches on there. But I think I managed to get sort of the scale and the nice crowded feel of all the tents together and how it feels like a proper tent city. The trees in the background and that muddy road in the coming to the foreground. Thursday coffee is knit night in 200 degrees, where I did the coffee cup and a portrait of my lovely friend Glyn, who sat and let me draw her. Really pleased with that, actually. To May, and we went out for the day for my birthday, and this was my first time taking watercolours out with me. So I did this sketch of the inside of Hyde Park Book Club, which is a cafe and bar in Headingley. I really quite like the different colours here, the detail that I managed to get in. That red in particular is really nice, and I like how that pops out and you get the other little hints of colour in the background. Really wanted to put something on that page and then never got around to it, so I think that's the only blank page in the book. Again, waiting for the bus on Park Row in Leeds, another view of one of the buildings, just focusing on the doorway this time instead of trying to cram in a whole building, and I really liked how it worked out. I liked using the paints. I actually finished it while I was sat on the bus, just getting the rest of the shading in. This is Forge Lock in Bramley in Leeds. I'm quite lucky to live within a short walk of the woods and the lovely canal locks. So just a view from the top of the lock looking down along the canal. It's not the best sketch by any stretch of the imagination, but it was nice to sit there in the sun and get that filled in. Somewhat abortive attempt at a scene of a railway station here. This was done from a platform in Leeds train station, and it was nice to start getting these big industrial structures in, but I kind of had to leave off when a train pulled in on the opposite platform and blocked my view entirely, and then when my own train came along and I had to get on and leave it. So unfortunately you've only got a few of the structures blocked in there with not as much detail and things just floating in space. But it's nice to have it in there. Sketch of 200 degrees in Leeds, looking at the bar, trying to get the perspective right here. Didn't quite manage it. You can see around here with the lights I started to get everything a bit bunched up and the size and position wasn't quite right, but as an exercise in perspective it was good to do. Now this is the start of a few sketches I did while in London. Walthamstow Market, I sat and had a late supper here, and while I sat there I sketched the buildings on the corner, and it was quite nice just to roughly plot all that in and try and get the scale right. Next day I went down to Hackney and visited a really nice vegan cafe called the Black Cat Cafe, and this is the view from their window where I sat drinking coffee with my paints and my sketchbook. I used a technique here I've picked up from Liz Steele, in which you block in all the shapes using just watercolour to start with, and try and do as much of the shapes and the shading with the watercolour before going back in with pen at the end to put in the final details. And it gives a really nice sense of the feel of things. It's quite relaxed, it's quite soft and flowing. There's these nice little bits of colour. I love all the different angles you get of residential areas, of different roof lines, of flats, of little bungalows, of the trees. You've got all sorts in there. It's one of my favourite little sketches. This was still sat in the cafe, and this the woman who sat opposite me was really kind and let me sketch her as a bit of practice. And then on to Shoreditch. While I sat having tea waiting for a friend, I did a quick sketch of the old Blue Last pub on the corner. Really nice building. Again, still struggling with the proportions, keeping it in this really small format. And I actually mucked up the perspective completely on those buildings at the back, the more modern buildings, having difficulty drawing what is I can physically see and what my brain is telling me the building should look like, and sometimes they can be different things, and that's why the angles are a bit off from there. But again, it's practice. It's interesting to see how that happened. this was still sat in that exactly the same spot. You may notice that my other drawings have no people in. It's not that I just go out on really quiet days, it's that I just avoid drawing people because I didn't know how to. So this was my first real attempt at drawing figures. I quite liked how it went. And then on to lunch, having a lovely blue iced latte and a tofu noodle bowl. They're not to scale, by the way. Another night at knitting in 200 degrees in Leeds. I forgot to take my knitting with me, so instead I painted my coffee and my friend's knitting instead. I really like the colours and the texture that's come across in there. Very quick, rough sketch using two different coloured inks of a tiny kitten on the back of a sofa in Leeds Cat Cafe. I think this really does get across how tiny that cat was. And again, some more just fun, rough sketches, nothing spectacular of the cats, but they were really pleasing. And then this is back to Leeds, just a watercolour sketch here. I didn't have my pen, I'd actually lost my pen. So this is just using watercolours to block in the shapes. I was really annoyed with this after I'd finished it. I didn't like it, but looking back on it now, I quite like how it's turned out and on the different shapes and shadows we've got. Oh, that's Land's Lane in Leeds. I've just noted it on the side there. This is in Roundhay Park, my first real go at doing a watercolour. Sorry, not a watercolour, a landscape. Looking out over the lake. It's not amazing, but it was good for a first go, trying to get all the different trees in, all the shadows and things. Couple of sketches of the people who were at the picnic with Leeds Disabled People Association organisation and their LGBTQ picnic. Obviously, these are not to scale, these were just two separate sketches that were on the same page. This was a day out in York. I think this was from the top floor of the Evil Eye bar. It's a bit odd because you're so close to it. The perspective is really interesting, so you end up with this almost very flat look to things. It's quite nice to do. And then a tea sketch, which I really like doing because I don't often use super bright colours, so the coffee cup and tea sketches are really good for getting bright colours, and I love how the teaspoons turned out in that one. I have literally no idea where I did these. I don't have any recollection of doing them, but there's some odd things. So this is Broadcasting House in Leeds, back to sort of more standard fare now. It's a really interesting building. I absolutely love the architecture. It is built in such a way that the shapes you think you are seeing are not actually the shapes of the building, which I think is amazing, and it makes for a very interesting building to try and draw, especially when it's just a quick on the way home sort of literally leaning on a wall sort of sketch. Another knit night sketch, more yarn and a nice glass, and then the complete opposite, instead of just using paints like on the previous page, that's just using inks. And then we're on to Temple Donuts and Coffee in Kirkstall, which is a lovely little donut and coffee cafe, as the name suggests. Quick sketch of the counter area and then of my rainbow coffee. They do a fantastic selection of brightly coloured drinks, which make for great subjects for watercolour sketches. Then this very recently, a afternoon in Mrs. Athers in Leeds. I'd had a really rough afternoon, had a panic attack. The staff were lovely and helped me calm down, and sitting just doing a quick watercolour sketch of the heather in a vase really helped soothe me, which was lovely. Back to Temple Coffee and Donuts. We go there way more than we probably should, and that was my golden latte. Not as happy with the teaspoon in that one, it's a bit flat, but it's still okay. This is a trip to Rodley Nature Reserve, just on the outskirts of Leeds, and and I really like the juxtaposition of the the electricity pylon next to the um, trees and the greenery. So I used ink pen to do the electricity pylon first, and then fill in the basic shape of the hillside and the trees, and then went over in all the different shades of green to build up the layers of trees and get some depth in there. I really like how that turned out. It's the contrast between nature and man-made stuff is my jam. Still in Rodley Nature Reserve, we found a pond full of water snails, and I was just absolutely delighted with them. I thought they were wonderful, and there were so many on all the foliage, on leaves, upside down on the surface of the water. They were great, so I just did a very rough sketch of them, plonked down on the grass there. And then we're moving on to only last week now, so end of August, Inkwell Arts in Chapel Allerton. Playing around with a bit of fancy lettering there, as you can see. And Inkwell Arts is a really wonderful place. They work with, do a lot of work with the charity Mind. And I had been there to see about volunteering, and then sat and had a cup of tea and decided to just try and capture the place. And I like how the soft colours but the lot of white space gives that feeling of creativity, but also of calmness and of openness and relaxed. And I think that really gets across what Inkwell Arts is all about. And here we are, the very last page, back to Kapow Coffee in Thornton Arcade in Leeds, and this is my view from the doorway. From my table through the doorway at a guy who was just having a rest with his bicycle. It was a really nice little sketch to do. You can see he actually got up and left before I finished doing his head, which is why his head has turned into an abstract piece. But other than that, I'm really pleased with the effect of the glass and how that changes colours, and all the angles of the doorway and the glass case there came out really well. So a great way to finish the book. I'm really pleased with the development of that, my first ever sketchbook.